appreciate that, Bubba. Tonight we're starting a new series called Upside Down, and we're really looking at Paul's life. We're going to journey with Paul through his adventure, through his journey. We're going to take a look at his life and how crazy upside down his world got turned because God messed it up. Let's be honest, made it better, but messed it up. And how maybe God kind of calls us to turn our world upside down as well. And so we're going to look at that story tonight. And so I want to start by really just looking at Paul's story. The Paul-Saul story, right? We grew up kind of hearing this story probably. So Saul was his first name, right? And he was on the road to Damascus, right? And all of a sudden he has this crazy flash of light, right? And he falls over or something. And a voice out of heaven, Jesus or God, says, Saul, Saul, why are you forsaking me? Or why are you persecuting my people, right? And so Paul was persecuting people that were part of something called the Way. And that's what they called it then, was they just called it the Way, because some guy at some point said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except for through me. And so they remembered those words, and so they weren't called Christians at the time, but they were called people of the Way. They were following the way that Jesus had created for them. And so they were doing that, and Saul at the time, was persecuting all those people. He was seeking them out, having them killed. Earlier on in Acts, this story in particular is in 9. Earlier in Acts, he has to do with other disciples, other followers getting killed. And so Saul was really kind of a rough dude. We also have every reason to believe that Saul was a pretty preppy guy too. Like, he definitely was the more preppy echelon of the community. He would go to school with Jessica at BA, I think. He'd be kind of preppy. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have made a BA joke. All right, so he was definitely more preppy side of things. Anywho, because we know this because he was a Roman citizen, which meant that his family came from money. This was something that I learned while we were studying this, because I always saw like Paul as kind of like the gruff dude that kind of probably came up from a really rough background or something like that. He really probably came from a very affluent background. And so here's this kind of affluent guy that's had a great life, and he's persecuting people, and all of a sudden he gets knocked down, and God says to him, why are you persecuting me? So that's in Acts 9. But there's a really interesting thing that happens Luke writes Acts. So in Acts 9, Luke is kind of writing Paul's story. But later on in Acts, Paul is having to recount his story. He's telling it before juries, pretty much, people that are persecuting him. And when he retells it, he does something cool. I think he does something that all pastors do. They add an extra line. It's like a line they've been withholding their whole life until that perfect moment to preach it.
It's like dad jokes.
Yeah, kind of like dad jokes. See, he's been holding back this line from his story for a while, I feel like. And he's in the perfect audience now, and he wants to share this line because he thinks it's going to really preach this time. And honestly, he's hoping that it might save his life. And so what he says is that when he was knocked down on the ground, when the light came and he got knocked down and he was there and he heard the voice from God, that there was an extra line that God said, and he said, Saul, God was talking to Saul, Saul, doesn't it hurt to kick against the goad? Doesn't it hurt to kick against the goad? Like a goat? No. It probably would hurt to kick a goat, depending on how you kicked it, I guess. I don't know. Okay, I'm sorry. So a goad was something kind of like this. Okay? I know, I'm sorry. So this was a goad. This was the closest thing that Derek brought this in for us. Closest thing we could find to a goad. A goad was like a long metal stick with a point at the end. It wasn't curved like this, but it was a sharp point at the end. And people who owned cattle used it to steer their cattle around. Like, they made them go different directions by poking them with the goad. And so what God was saying is, it would hurt to kick against that thing, wouldn't it? If somebody was poking you with that and you decided to kick back against it, it would hurt like crap. And so God is saying to Paul, doesn't it hurt to kick against this? Which leads us to believe, right, that God has been pointing him in a direction for quite some time. And finally now God has had it with Saul and says, I'm sick of you not listening to me. And now I'm really going to get your attention. So he knocks him down on the road to Damascus, right? And we know the rest of his story, right? Paul goes blind, then scales fall off of his eyes. People are sent to talk to him, and then he runs off into history, preaching the gospel and changing all of Christianity, right? Becoming a pillar of Christian faith for us, right? That's the rest of his story. He writes pretty much the rest of the New Testament. But there's something even more interesting there that happens. See, in my head, I've always imagined that Paul is like, like when something really cool happens in your life and you get so excited and you're just talking like a mile a minute and you're like, God has done this incredible thing in my life and I'm going to follow, I'm going to go and it's going to be awesome and he's going to provide and it's going to be great and I'm going to go and do it. Like that's what I always imagine happened to Paul, but that's not actually what happens next. See, next Paul goes home and he waits for about 3 years. He just goes and sits in his hometown. Which to me, I was always like, there's no way that's what he did. That's like spiritual whiplash, like God is right there in your face and things are going nuts and crazy and he's saying all this awesome stuff and you are excited and you're going to do it. And then he hits the brakes and it's like, go home and wait for 3 years. Just go sit there. He learned the family trade, which was tent making. So he learned how to go and make tents and worked in that trade right around in his hometown. Some people say he might have preached some, but there's not really all that much reason to believe that he did. So he just went home for 3 years and he waited. And I don't know about you guys, but waiting is something that I am incredibly terrible at. Everyone on our staff can tell you that I don't like to wait to eat lunch because I don't want to stand in a line. Like standing in a line is terrible. If I walk into a restaurant and there's more than like a 10-minute wait, I'm done. I'm out of there. I know, it's ridiculous, but it's true. I don't like waiting, and I think we're all kind of like that we don't like the waiting process. And for Paul, he had a three-year period where he went and waited. And here's what I think happened in that 3-year period. We can only speculate really what happened. But Paul, when he came out and started teaching and preaching and going out, he had a very formed theology. He would have had a rich Jewish culture before that. He would have known a lot of things. But he had a sound theology about Jesus, which Jesus would have been a brand new person for him. So I think he processed a lot of his theology. And ironically enough, most pastors go to school to get an MDiv, which is a 3-year program. So it's kind of like Paul went to college. He went to seminary. He went and he learned and he waited for what was going to come next in his adventure. And I think the most important thing to note in that waiting is that he stayed true, even in the waiting. He stayed true to God and he stayed true to his calling. And on the other side of that waiting, God would turn his life completely upside down. And it would never be the same again. So this past Friday, I've been thinking about this lesson all week, and then I was thinking on Friday, I celebrated an anniversary. Not wedding. That's in May. You can clap for that in May. On Friday, I've worked here for 3 years. They hired me my first day was April 1st. I really thought that I was going to come in and Lindsay was going to be like, gotcha, and then kick me out the door. But that would have been great and terrible because I quit my other job. Anyways, so I celebrated that. And in the midst of thinking about the journey that led me back here, I remembered something that my youth minister wrote to me right before I left this ministry when I was going off to college. And my youth minister wrote me a letter, and it had all this stuff in there. But there was a line that I remember I was so encouraged by. He said, when the time is right, God will lead you to a place to work with youth. And it was both like an encouraging but frustrating line, because it was saying, like, when the time is right, not when you want it to happen, but when the time is right, God will lead you to a place to work with youth. And I had no idea what that would be. And I remember thinking in my mind when I read that line, I was thinking, and of course Lindsay and I have both said we never wanted to come back and work here, and I always thought that too. But on that day, I remember reading that and thinking, I hope it is at Brentwood one day. I hope it is there. I would love to go back one day and serve that congregation. That helped me so much. And so God led me on a nearly decade adventure, going around different places and learning to do ministry and learning in different settings and getting to know different people, eventually leading me back here and kind of turning my life a little bit upside down. So I wonder this evening, as we take a look at Saul's story, two things, or Paul's story. Two things. A, where is God goading you? I know, it's a silly word. Where is God goading you? Where maybe right now is God trying to push you in some sort of direction? And seniors, I know right now you're in the place of you've probably chosen a college, or maybe you're close to that, and you're just trying to get out the door. And God might be pointing you in all sorts of directions right now. And some of you might be in the place where you're like, Adam, I had that crazy, awesome God experience, and it was at Breakthrough, and God said amazing things to me, and I had these just awesome, and I was so excited, and I came back, and I've just been waiting. It's like God gave me spiritual whiplash. I've just been sitting here and saying, God, where are you? Where are you now? And I want to encourage you in both those ways. Where is God goading you? Where is God pointing you this evening? But also, where are you just waiting right now? But in the midst of waiting, staying close to God and staying true to the call that God has on your life. Because the assurance that we have from God is that God is in the midst even of waiting. Even when you feel like you're just sitting there, God is in the midst of that. God is doing preparation in your heart and in your mind for what God has for you going forward. So tonight, I'm going to open us in prayer, and then I'm going to leave just a moment of silence in the middle for you guys to just pray and meditate. It's going to be like 45 seconds. Don't stress out. About 45 seconds to just ask God those two questions. Just consider, God, maybe where are you pointing me right now? And I've been kind of kicking against it. And maybe the prayer tonight that you need to ask is, God, I feel like I'm sitting here waiting. Could you hurry up a little bit? Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks tonight that